Hello, fellow wargamers and history buffs. Last week I had a chance to sit down with a friend and play 1812 Napoleon's Fateful March. So I now have a better understanding of the game and can give you an educated appraisal of the game. So this is what's coming up. So this is what the game looks like when it's all set up. Here we are about a little over halfway through the scenario that we were playing. You can see that each side has little blinds that they can then keep track of the units that are part of that leader's formation. So here we've got Devu, and he's got some infantry that's part of his group. Because it's behind the blind, then of course your opponent doesn't know what troops you have, and this led to a nasty surprise the Russians had when they came out thinking that Napoleon had fewer troops than he really did. So this is a fun element of the game. Plus, it's then a way for you to kind of keep track of stuff and have it a little bit more neat on the board. Here we can see the board itself. We've got the different leader pieces for the French and the Russians out there. And then you'll also see on the board we have these different devastation markers of different levels. So 1, 2, or 3. And then this indicates how badly the terrain has been devastated by the armies going through, basically hoovering up all of the food that the peasants might have been hiding for themselves. So food, fodder, everything else is kind of destroyed in the process. The little blue cubes out here, or the green cubes, indicate a supply depot for the appropriate French or Russian forces. And then, of course, you can see with the point-to-point movement, you've got lines or dashed lines indicating where folks can move from one town or city to the next. The big driver for the game, and where you're going to be making most of your decisions, is with selecting orders for your forces. And this could be whether you're applying in a single order to a stack or a small group of forces, or you're applying one or more orders to a leader and the forces that are associated with that leader. The orders themselves, once you and your opponent have placed them on the board in such a way that you can see them, but your opponent can't see them, you're then going to be executing them in a particular sequence. So you're going to always go with forced marches first, where you and then your colleague are going to be executing your forced marches. Then you'll have your cavalry patrols, your march movement, and then if there's any, you know, opposing forces in the same location, and one of them has an evade order, they can then evade. Basically, it's a way to avoid battle. Otherwise, there will be combat, and during the combat phase, if you have one of your forces has a defend order, they will have a benefit for that upcoming combat. Otherwise, battle is going to happen. Then once the battle phase is over, then any units that were under the rally order will rally. You'll place depots, and then you'll have the attrition phase, and that's then any units that are under a forage order will benefit during the attrition phase. So that's pretty much how it goes. It's just a very simple sequence, and you just follow it step by step by step. But deciding what to do and selecting those orders, that's the big sort of decision-making part and what's driving the game between you and your opponent. Now, each side gets 2 orders and sometimes they'll have a bonus orders depending on which side you're playing and which generals might be out on the field. Otherwise, what's happening where you're getting your room for additional orders or your currency for additional orders are through cards. So each side's going to have a hand of cards, and the large number that's here in the upper corner is then going to allow you, if you play it during the order phase, allow you to get additional orders. So this is basically how you can mobilize a considerable number of forces. Usually you're not able to have more than, say, 6, maybe 7 orders for your army during any given turn. In addition to the using the cards for the orders, you can also use the cards for their printed historic event. So you could play them for the event, or you can play them for getting additional orders. There's also a set of cards that you can use when you have the combat, and they're then going to influence how the combat works. So it will either, be a detriment to your opponent, or it will be a modifier for yourself. And so these are the ones here that have the little crossed swords on them. They indicate that this is something that you're doing during the battle phase or during the combat phase. And so this is principally where the different orders are coming in and then how these cards are used. Now, there are some cards that have a particular historic event, and if you draw this, then you must play it immediately. And so this then typically is something that is a penalty for the player who drew it. And so each side has their own deck. The Russians have their own deck. The French have their own deck. And so there are these must-play cards that typically are going to penalize you in some way. So this is how the cards then fit in with it, where you're using the cards for either their printed, historic event, you're using them for orders, or if there's a battle that's happening, you're using them for that particular battle effect that might be the case. Or there are some that are like a reaction type of card that has a little exclamation point. This is something that you would place in this particular circumstance. So this particular one you'd play after losing a battle. It then eliminates pursuit losses. So there are some cards like this that you'd have. Typically, your hand is very limited. You're only going to have maybe 4 or 5 cards. You get a card each turn, but you typically want to spend more cards than you have cards in your hand. And so knowing when to spend them and what to spend them on is another big part of the decision-making process in the game. Since this is an operational level game, the combat or battles are very abstract. So principally what you're doing is you're just going to be adding up how many factors you have, strength point factors you have. They're going to be modified by, if they were forced marching or attacking across a river, or some other battle effect that might be modified by the card. And then you're going to take a look at that number and you're going to roll a die. And that die roll then added to how many points you have is going to indicate how many losses the opponent suffers. So the number of losses is entirely based on the size of your force and that modified die roll. So it's very straightforward. Then your opponent applies those losses. They're going to look at theirs. They're going to do the same thing. And then you're going to apply your losses. And that's how combat works. It's not very detailed. But where you do get into the fun of things is with those combat cards. If you're there with a leader and they're able to play multiple combat cards, the ones here with the little sword, that's then when you can get some fun things happening, and that kind of gives it a little bit of flavor with the combat that you wouldn't have just looking at the table. Now, since this is an operational level game, a big part of the process is keeping your men in supply and dealing with attrition. Anyone who's familiar with the Russian campaign knows that this is a big issue because that's probably what caused the vast majority of losses to both sides. We have the supply depots that the French and the Russians are both using. There's a simple matrix here where you're keeping track of, how far away you are from any of those particular depots. You're then looking at how many forces you have in that particular space, and then you're taking a look at what the losses might be for you. Of course, this is modified by, in some cases, cards that can be played, but also can be modified by the weather die roll. And so this is then going to be a little bit different each turn based on those factors. But what's happening is slowly over time, your forces are losing effectiveness. And so here, for example, we have Eugene's force, where out of a group of, let's see, I think he's got, 10 some odd infantry, well over, 50%, and I think 60% are all now exhausted. He's only got 2 infantry that are fresh and some cavalry that are fresh. And so what happens here is that, after a while, all these guys that are exhausted, if they're attacked and there's no fresh troops to defend them, they're all wiped out. That's a terrible loss for the French. They've got to get somewhere where they can be rallied. It's going to take time to rally all of these guys. And so as a result, Eugene's force at this point is kind of ineffective. It can't be used or without the risk of it being, potentially severely damaged or destroyed. So they've got to rest. And so that's going to take time when you're trying to march on Moscow. Now you've got to hold back for several turns to rally your men before you start to move forward again. So this is part of the balancing act that both the French and the Russians have, because the Russians are also suffering their troops becoming exhausted during their marches and during combat and during their attrition. So, how did our game go? Well, pretty good. Using just the rules and the player aid cards, we were able to jump right in and go along with it and get a pretty good feel for the game, and actually able to play it fairly smoothly after a few turns. So my compliments to the designers and the folks at Vuca. This is really well-written rules and a very clear presentation. The French were able to push the Russians off from their flank approaches, while the Russians still have some forces out on the edges. They've really pulled back most of their leaders to try to consolidate there around Smolensk. The French just advanced right along here. You can see where they put their supply depots and moving out towards this part. So this is as far as they'd gotten by the end of the July turns. So here we're starting August, and Napoleon is out here at Mogliev, I think is how it's pronounced. Well, maybe. I'm not a Russian speaker. And so the Napoleon and the rest were going to be using the next few turns to rally their troops who had become exhausted on the march there. Meanwhile, the Russians had been pulling back and trying to get their forces concentrated there around Smolensk. We did have a battle over here in this area, which saw the demise of Barclay de Tolly and a Russian army. They tried to go up against Napoleon, not knowing that Napoleon had a stronger force than they anticipated. So you can see then with this line of march, the devastation that's happened along the way. This means that if Napoleon's got to retreat later on, he's going to want to go through some other territory that hasn't all been chewed up, or if he's able to move back along his depots. And so, kind of knowing what happened historically, you can definitely see where, with all this devastation that would have happened, the army basically running out of food and fodder on the way back to Germany. So, an overview of the game, I'm going to say that this is a really good one. It has beautiful components, very nicely done, and very high quality, so no complaints in that regard. As far as from an operational game, I think it really captures the challenges that both sides had with trying to supply their armies as they marched out across this vast space. The game mechanics themselves, I really liked the interplay between the cards and the orders, and of course the hidden units. So having this where you've got sort of confusion or some secrets, where not everything is known to your opponent, certainly makes for a more fun and tense game, particularly with your decision making. So that's really good. That's a lot of fun. The game box itself showed that solitaire rating was very low, and I think that's probably the case. This is not designed for solitaire. You can play it solitaire, but you're going to be missing out on some of these other elements and tensions that are kind of designed for that face-to-face type of play. As far as the ease of playing the game, I was very impressed with that. My friend Robert and I had never played this before. I just kind of read through the rules in a very cursory fashion, and then we got together and we started kind of going through the rules. And then the player aid cards have all the information on them. They're very well written, very easy to understand, and we were able to just jump right into the game and play it. So playability rating is very high. I give it good marks for that. Now, for an operational game, it really does capture a lot of the historic flavor of the time period. You've got obviously the artwork using the different pictures of the leaders. You've got a lot of the really beautiful artwork on the cards, but the cards themselves add a dimension of the historic flavor, whether it's for the actual historic events that are triggered by the cards, or if it's by using the play of the cards during battle to kind of bring in that element of, we're forming square, or we have a cavalry charge or something like that, that kind of give it a little bit more flavor or zest than you might have if you were just rolling on a table. So that's really very nice too. So altogether, a very good game. If you have a chance to play it, I would encourage you to. I'm not sure if they're going to have a vassal module for it, but if so, then that could certainly be a lot of fun, and certainly open it up for people to playing it more easily if you're not able to sit down at the table and play with somebody. The scenarios themselves, there's multiple scenarios, so you've got lots of options depending on how much time you want to sit down and play. My friend and I were just playing the initial invasion scenario, and so we were able to get through a big chunk of that in the space of about 4 or 5 hours. So that's pretty good. All right, so there you have it. That is my assessment of 1812, Napoleon's Fateful March. And if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and make them in the section below. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. And of course, if you want to materially support the channel, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com, where you can either just buy me a coffee as a way of saying thank you, or you can join our monthly membership. All right, thanks everybody for watching, and if you want to watch another video, we're playing a live stream of La Bataille de Moscow. This is on Monday nights, and you can tune in live, or you can watch the stuff that we've already done so far. We're playing with the Regs 30 rules for La Bataille, and we are taking a totally different approach than what actually happened historically. So it's kind of fun to see how that plays out. So join us on a Monday night for one of those. And until then, keep playing, keep having fun, and be well.